EVP and CCO of eCivis, Merril Oliver. Thank you for coming on to KMOX.
Thank you, Ryan, for having me.
We're talking about this big stimulus bill. We just had the $1.9 trillion, and they're already salivating at the idea of perhaps doing another one, or at least the door is open before we're even done spending this one. And when you look at this funding and you look at the money that's going out to more than just individuals, we're looking at local governments and states that are a big beneficiary of this money. Do you believe the money is getting into the right hands?
I think the way in which the act is written, the flow of funds are going through local governments and state governments. And so the provisions in the act do require a level of oversight, transparency, and accountability. So there are requirements that the recipients of those dollars report back to the government that the money did go to its intended purpose and did get into the appropriate hands.
Yeah, the definition of the intended purpose seems to be stretched a lot in local governments. Like here in St. Louis City and St. Louis County, the definition of what would be a necessity to fight the virus could vary, and then I'm guessing every other city has their own definition of what would work and what would be part of the compliance. So do you think that definition being widely interpreted differently is going to lead to a lot of people spending it, I should not people, but government spending it in a way it shouldn't be spent?
That's a really good question. And I think that there's a level of flexibility provided within the Act because different communities have been impacted very differently. And so it really is incumbent upon those units of government to have those internal controls in place. The reporting, the detailed reporting that has to flow back up to the government, they will be held accountable for the way in which the funding has been spent, and are they driving positive impact for their communities?
Makes you wonder, because when we just recently had a mayoral a debate, and then we had the mayoral election here, we're going to have a new administration coming into the city of St. Louis. One of the big questions was, how are you going to spend the money? St. Louis is expected to get about $500 million as part of this stimulus. And there's always the question of what's the most responsible way to do it. When you look at the statistics that are out there today, Michigan, for example, really still hit hard with COVID. Missouri, nowhere near the same level of outbreaks. Seems like we have a better control of it. So they would say probably better for us is to spend the money on policing, because we definitely need better ways to handle that. Some places are looking at the homeless issues because they say the spread of COVID in the homeless population, if we really want to make sure we can squash this, we got to at least stress that, because it's going to be difficult to stop people living on the street coming in contact with each other all the time. So different places have different priorities. If you're like in a state of Missouri, and it seems like you're pretty much out of the woods when it comes to outbreaks, at least compared to places like Michigan, would that constitute the ability to spend it on things like policing or some of these other problems we're having with crime? Or do you think that doesn't constitute the scope of how this was meant to be spent?
Well, I think, again, the provision of this Rescue Plan Act is to also help stimulate the economies in various communities. So being data-driven at the local government level and being held accountable for how you're driving those activities do fall within the Act and the way the Act has been written. Again, providing some flexibilities there so that the economy can begin to recover, and what within that particular community is one of the driving factors. And so I think there is going to be a requirement in the level of reporting. Well, if the funds are spent on policing, how did it stimulate the economy, or how did it provide a level of rescue for that community?
Who do you think is going to be the body, the governing body that will determine if it was spent responsible or not? Because if it's a federal agency, they don't understand fully what each community is going through, what may be the more important issues for a certain community in order to try to stimulate the economy in that community. So when they go back and try to audit this sort of thing, who are the ones that are going to be looking at it? And do you think that they're going to be pretty much loosey-goosey? Because the worst thing that could happen is you take a city that's already hurting for money and ask them to pay money back. That would even be pretty devastating.
Yes, absolutely. So again, with data-driven approaches to demonstrating the need and how you're accounting for the program outcome and demonstrating the direct measurable results using this funds at the community level, auditors are going to be looking at that.
I want to know, last year when they started giving these PPP loans out, and a lot of individuals and businesses that were applying for these, some of them did not actually qualify, and then the government was said to have asked for this money back. I don't know if any of that actually happened. So what about businesses that may be listening today? Maybe they didn't quite qualify for these loans before. They may be thinking that they might try it again because they haven't been asked for a refund on some of these things. What do you think about the level of businesses and how they could perhaps work into this system?
Yes, I would recommend that the businesses work with the local governments, the economic advisory boards within their local government, and access those programs. I think with this second set of funding through the American Rescue Plan Act, there have been some lessons learned, and there is some time now before the disbursement of funds, which we're expecting about mid-June. The government is writing up provisions around how the funds are to be expended, and state and local governments have learned and have put in place processes so that the funds can be accessed by those who need it.
So what are some of the things you do at eCivis? I'm not too familiar with that organization.
So at eCivis, we provide a technology to actually manage grant dollars flowing into the communities. We work at building in the internal controls over those funds, and that is really important, especially with such a large amount of money. We want to reduce that administrative burden that our government workforce experiences, because that is a cost in and of itself. So if you're maximizing the use of technology, and by the way, this act provides for governments to spend funds and use technology so that they do have those internal controls, not just over the expenditure of the dollars, but over program success. And our technology and software can track the expenditure of the funds. It has automated internal controls in place, and you can track your program outcomes, which is critical to presenting and reporting out the success and also being transparent and accountable.
So do you think there's going to be another stimulus that's passed? Do you think it'll be, well, maybe this is a two-part question. Do you think there'll be another one this year, much like to the scale we saw with the $1.9 trillion? Or the second part, follow-up would be, do you think we need one?
That's a question for, I think, the politicians and the governments to really galvanize around. I know they're discussing it, and we are looking at a possible infrastructure pot of money coming out. But what I can tell you is, should those funds be released and the federal government determine that they're going to roll out another spending package. The existing programs have now put in place a path toward expending those funds effectively and efficiently should the federal government determine whether or not it's necessary.
Just one of the criticisms of the act, and a lot of times Republicans would bring this up, is that when you have so much money that is being funneled into these places that have been, trouble with money to begin with, so it might not have been distributed to states evenly. They may have shown preferential treatment to some of the more, Democratic-controlled states, so showing that the Biden administration or whoever is putting this together, drafting it in a way to try to reward people that are friendly to the administration. Did you notice any of that when it came to the money that is being distributed, or have you really not noticed that?
I have not. In the administration of funds through our technology, we're not noticing that. What we're seeing is, and what we focus on in supporting all governments that receive these dollars, is that they have internal controls in place, that they are being held accountable, they take steps to provide a level of transparency over those expenditure. So, again, it's up to the federal government and decision makers at that level to determine who gets what allocation. But what we do see is a formula that addresses population, and now we're looking at requirements to present data that demonstrates need.
By the way, if people wanted to look up your organization, eCivis, online or learn more about it, where can they go? eCivis.com, eCivis.com, and they can actually click on a visual map of the ARPA funds. Oh, okay. Merril Oliver, EVP and CCO of eCivis. Hey, thank you so much for coming on to KMOX.
Thank you very much for having me, Ryan.
And she joins us on the Bommarito Automotive Group guest line. This is Overnight America, KMOX.